Hello, this is Lance Cleveland. I'm going to go over a hack of a WordPress plugin. I actually have taken a WordPress theme and a bunch of plugins that go with it and forked it off into my own code because there's just far too much wrong with the architecture and all sorts of things going on behind the scenes that's just really horrible for a high-performance website, and I'm trying to build a high-performance music directory. So what I've done is started this project and basically have copied their code. I'm going to clean it up as I go and see if I can come up with something that I can use that's a little bit nicer. So one of the issues I found today, I'm testing Store Locator Plus, that's my main WordPress plugin. And I've noticed on a bunch of pages there's this little snippet of code up here, a little button that's just rogue button, comes out of nowhere. And I've tracked it down to being one of these extensions that's installed as a plugin. Now, the really bad part about this piece of code is even though they were smart enough to use CSS to hide that div on a lot of pages, it's actually running everywhere. Doesn't matter if I go to the standard dashboard page, post page, any admin page, it's loading their code, and it's pretty heavy code. So I'm going to go through and show you how I'm going to stop this plugin from running everywhere and all over the code. So the first thing we're going to look at is this is the main plugin file, and I tracked down the culprit to being this metabox code. So I look in the metabox PHP file, and down here is where it creates this modal form. Now this is happening, if you notice in this code, this is all inline code here. This is all procedural code. The isAdmin just checks to see if you're on an admin page and you're logged in as admin. So that means on every single admin page, doesn't matter which page you're on, it's loading all of this, which won't even get into how horrific it is to see this icon array loaded like this, but here it is. Huge icon array, font awesome icons, all loaded up in huge arrays, and then only output specific ones. It's that in and of itself is a horrible design. But the part I'm worried about right now is that this loads on every page. I want to stop that. So, of course, using my Get repository, I've forked off into another branch so we can kind of step through it. And the very first thing I'm doing is I'm creating a class. I'm a big fan of using classes. It creates really, in essence, a namespace without dealing with all the namespace conflicts and all those sort of things. And so I've created this base class here. And it just has a very simple function that I'm going to create right now that I'm going to use called isPostTypeHours. And it's doing the check to see if we're on an admin page. If not, we're not going to load any of this sort of stuff, so that's taking care of our isAdmin test that's already in line. Then it's going to check to see if the request is post type variable is being passed in, because if not, then we're not on one of our specific pages for this plugin. Then, of course, we're checking to see if the post is one of the ones that we want to actually load all our junk onto. So here it is, the list of post types. So pretty simple class. Of course, with PHP doc helpers, so that really helps, especially with a thing like PHP Storm for autocomplete and that sort of stuff. Something else that's a big thing that I like to make sure of is no closing PHP tags. Can't tell you how many times it's caused problems on websites where an errant piece of code ends up below that closing PHP tag. So really, if you're doing classes, try to leave that off the end of the file. I think that's now a WordPress core standard as well. So anyway, so I've got that class ready to go. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load that in. So I'm just going to jump forward here up on my branch, the next step. And we can see I've now loaded this in at the top of my file. I'm going to use this in the future to really extend the functionality of this plugin. And I'm going to set a global, hopefully with a name that's unique enough to me. In this case, it's the name of the renamed plugin that I'm creating. And we're actually just going to require once that file. And then we're going to set the global to an instantiation of that class. So that's going to kind of put that in a nice, accessible namespace for us. We can get to that anywhere in our PHP execution, which is anywhere inside of WordPress. We can call this global and access all those methods. So that's going to be ready for us to now use those methods. Now we're going to go up to the next step, which is actually implementing this. And what I've done is, in this case, you see how I have the class exists here? It's really better to put that inside where you're defining the class. Obviously, that was a mistake just when I created this quickly. So I'm going to refresh that, and you can see this is a better way to do this. Put the class exists right inside of here. Why do you do that? In this case, this name's very unique. very unlikely that any other plugin or anything in the entire WordPress application is going to have this exact class name. But just in case something else does, this will prevent my plugin from pissing all over everyone else's code. So that's always a good habit to, try not to piss over other people's things in WordPress. PHP, of course, everything's in the shared global memory stack and namespace, so you try to manage your things appropriately. And the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to take out that isAdmin that is saying, hey, load this code on every page. And we're going to use this new method here to do a different type of check. So all that code's still in place, still loading in memory, which I know is horrid. There's better ways to do that. We'll talk about that later in a different video. But what I'm doing here is I'm using that global. So what's going to happen is when this plugin loads into memory, it's going to define this global, it's going to require that as a class, and it's going to instantiate that class and assign it to this. So now we have access to all those public methods. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to test that public method. So I'm going to say if that class is post type hours is true, then allow this function to be defined. So what's going to happen now, I can actually turn the debugger on so we can actually see how this is working, is when I come over here to this page, I'm going to go to my locator page, for example. When it runs this locator page, you'll see that button's gone, and we've not triggered our debugger to actually fire this off, which means none of this code's being run anymore. And now if we go to a page that is being managed by this plugin, like the staff members page, this is going to fire off now, and we can see that it's inside of here. And if we look down here, we can actually see what it's done. So it's actually run through these hooks and classes, and it's testing this request post type set to members, and that post type is on this list here. So now I've made a very easy way to check to see if we're running one of our admin pages without loading the code on every single page. So again, some of the things to keep in mind here. Don't load your code on every single admin page. Try to be intelligent about what you're loading it on. So instead of just doing isAdmin, try to create a function like this where it's saying, hey, here's a list of all the pages or page slugs. In this case, I'm just looking at post types. That was the easiest thing for me to grab a hold of from the request variable. And then only loading the page by returning true or false on this custom method when we're loading our own page. So that's one of the things you want to do. Try to use classes. Classes, I know they seem difficult at first, but it's definitely worth learning classes when you're writing PHP code in WordPress. And try not to do inline functions if you can help it, especially generic named functions like these. Eventually, if someone else creates a plugin or a WordPress theme that uses the same function named meta box find repeatable and you don't have that inside a class, it is going to break, especially when you're not doing if function exists checks around it. So that's it. That's a quick lesson there on how to make a plugin or theme a little bit more intelligent about what code it loads and making sure it only loads it on pages that you're managing. Thanks for watching.